We are following a rapidly developing situation that has sent immediate shockwaves through global financial markets and placed the United States military on its highest state of alert in the Middle East in recent memory. Within the last hour, confirmed reports indicate a significant escalation in the Persian Gulf, where a massive buildup of naval assets is currently underway. This is not a drill, and it is certainly not routine maneuvering. What we are witnessing is a precise, high-stakes standoff that has pushed tensions between Washington and Tehran to a fever pitch, threatening to upend the fragile stability of the region's most critical energy corridor. The Pentagon has yet to issue a formal declaration of war, but the movement on the ground and in the water suggests a posture of imminent engagement. Intelligence sources are confirming that the U.S. Fifth Fleet has repositioned key destroyers and carrier strike groups into a defensive formation near the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point through which a staggering percentage of the world's oil supply must pass. In response, satellite imagery analyzed just moments ago shows a reciprocal, aggressive mobilization of Iranian naval forces, including fast attack swarm boats and shore-based missile batteries, locking onto the very waters that international tankers traverse daily. Wall Street has reacted instantly and unforgivingly to these developments. As news of the standoff broke, West Texas Intermediate and Brent crude futures spiked aggressively, signaling that the markets are pricing in not just a disruption, but a potential conflict. Traders are scrambling. Algorithms are executing sell-offs in tech and buying sprees in energy and defense sectors, and the average American consumer is watching, knowing that what happens in these distant waters in the next 24 hours could dictate the price of gas, heating oil, and goods across the United States for months to come. This is a moment of profound volatility, but to understand why this specific moment feels different, why seasoned diplomats are using words like precarious and unprecedented, we have to look beyond the breaking headlines. We need to understand the invisible machinations happening behind the curtain. While the aircraft carriers cast long shadows over the Gulf, there is a second, parallel story unfolding in the shadows of a hotel in Turkey. It is a story of secret back channels, desperate diplomacy, and a slim, fading hope that a full-scale catastrophe can be averted before the first missile is fired. This is the story of how the world arrived at the brink, and what it looks like when the unstoppable force of the U.S. military meets the immovable object of Iranian geopolitical strategy. The atmosphere in the Pentagon right now is likely one of controlled chaos, a stark contrast to the deceptive calm of the Persian Gulf waters. To understand the gravity of this buildup, one must visualize the geography. The Strait of Hormuz is narrow. At its tightest point, the shipping lanes are only 2 miles wide in either direction. It is a geographical bottleneck that effectively holds the global economy hostage. Into this confined space, the United States has introduced advanced Arleigh Burke-class destroyers and air wings capable of projecting power hundreds of miles inland. This is not merely a show of force. It is the establishment of dominance intended to deter aggression. However, in the complex theater of asymmetric warfare, a massive aircraft carrier is also a massive target. For weeks, the intelligence community has been picking up chatter, fragmented signals, and intercepted communications, suggesting that Tehran was preparing for a significant move. The buildup didn't happen overnight, but the acceleration we are seeing today is exponential. We are seeing reports of missile silos being opened and radar systems going active along the Iranian coast. This transition from passive defense to active targeting is what triggered the sudden shift in U.S. posture. It is a game of chicken played with nuclear-powered vessels and ballistic missiles, where a single miscalculation, a single rogue commander, or a misunderstood radar blip could ignite a chain reaction that no amount of diplomacy could reverse. The economic implications of this standoff are already bleeding into the real world. Energy analysts have long warned that the fear premium on oil is a psychological construct. But today, the fear is based on tangible reality. If the strait is closed, even for a few days, the supply chain shock would be immediate. We are talking about millions of barrels of oil per day simply vanishing from the global market. For the U.S. economy, which is still navigating the complexities of inflation and supply chain recovery, this is the worst-case scenario. Logistics companies are already rerouting tankers. Insurance premiums for shipping in the region have skyrocketed by triple digits in the last 6 hours, and major airlines are diverting flights to avoid the airspace over the Gulf. The ripple effects are moving faster than the ships themselves. What makes this situation particularly chilling for observers is the silence from the White House regarding the specifics of the rules of engagement. Usually, in moments of heightened tension, there's a flurry of public statements, warnings, and red lines drawn in the sand. Today, the statements have been sparse, terse, and heavily curated. This suggests that the administration is operating on intelligence that has not yet been made public, perhaps involving specific threats to U.S. personnel or assets that necessitate a surprise advantage. The lack of rhetoric is in many ways more terrifying than the usual bluster. It implies that the time for talking is over and the time for operational readiness has begun. However, beneath the roar of jet engines and the panic of the stock market, A completely different narrative is struggling to breathe. While the world's cameras are trained on the aircraft carriers, a small, nondescript convoy of vehicles was spotted earlier today arriving at a government guest house in Ankara, Turkey. These vehicles did not bear flags. The individuals stepping out of them avoided the press. But confirmed leaks from diplomatic sources suggest that these are high-level envoys from Washington and Tehran, engaging in a desperate, secret back-channel dialogue mediated by Turkish officials. This is the lifeline. This is the slim hope that global leaders are clinging to. Back-channel diplomacy has historically been the mechanism that solves crises when public diplomacy fails. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was a secret deal that saved the world, not the public posturing. In Ankara, the conversation is likely stripping away the ideology and focusing on the transaction. What does Iran need to de-escalate? What is the United States willing to offer without looking weak? These talks are happening in a pressure cooker. The negotiators in that room know that every hour they spend debating terms is another hour, where a 19-year-old sailor in the Gulf might have to decide whether an approaching boat is a fisherman or a suicide bomber. The disconnect between the quiet, carpeted rooms in Turkey and the sweltering steel decks of the warships is jarring. The existence of these talks reveals that neither side truly wants a war, yet neither side can afford to be seen blinking first. It is a classic geopolitical trap. The U.S. cannot withdraw its fleet without damaging its credibility as a security guarantor for its allies in the region. Iran cannot stand down its defenses without appearing capitulated to Western pressure, which could threaten the regime's internal stability. So they escalate to de-escalate, pushing the envelope to the absolute tearing point in hopes that the other side flinches. The danger, of course, is that in a system this complex, you cannot control every variable. You cannot control the rogue militia groups, the technical malfunctions, or the sheer unpredictability of human fear in a combat zone. As night falls over the Persian Gulf, the visibility drops, but the tension rises. The radar operators on those U.S. ships are staring at screens that are becoming increasingly cluttered with contacts. Every blip is a potential threat. Every radio silence is a potential ambush. The psychological toll on the servicemen and women deployed there is immense. They are the tip of the spear, waiting for an order that could change the course of history. Meanwhile, back in the United States, families are waking up to push notifications about imminent threats and rising gas prices, trying to parse through the noise to understand if this is just another cycle of tension or the beginning of a conflict that will demand the involvement of their sons and daughters. The energy markets, often the most accurate barometer of geopolitical reality, are refusing to stabilize. This indicates that the smart money does not believe the situation will resolve quickly. Investors are hedging against a prolonged conflict. This financial pessimism creates a feedback loop. As prices rise, economic instability grows, putting more pressure on political leaders to do something, which often leads to rash decisions. It is a vicious cycle where economics and warfare feed off each other. The freeze in the markets is mirroring the freeze in diplomatic relations, with everyone waiting for the first domino to fall. We must also consider the regional players watching from the sidelines. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Israel are monitoring this buildup with existential concern. A conflict in the Gulf is not a distant news story for them. It is happening in their backyard. Their air defense systems are active, their militaries are on alert, and their lines to Washington are burning hot. The complexity of this alliance network means that a U.S.-Iran conflict would almost certainly not remain bilateral. It would draw in the entire region, turning a localized naval standoff into a sprawling multi-front war that would consume the Middle East. This is the nightmare scenario that the secret talks in Turkey are frantically trying to prevent. Current reports indicate that the U.S. Secretary of State has canceled a planned trip to Europe to remain in Washington, monitoring the secure feeds from the Situation Room. This confirms that the administration views the next 24 to 48 hours as critical. The window for a diplomatic off-ramp is closing. If the talks in Turkey fail, or if they are sabotaged by a leak or a provocation on the ground, the military logic takes over. Once the shooting starts, the logic of war dictates that you do not stop until the enemy is neutralized. That is, a threshold that, once crossed, allows for no return. As we look at the specific military hardware involved, the stakes become even clearer. The U.S. has deployed electronic warfare planes capable of jamming Iranian radar, blinding their command and control centers. In response, Iran has dispersed its naval assets, hiding them in the jagged coastlines, coves, and inlets, preparing for guerrilla warfare at sea. This is not a setup for a conventional battle. It is a setup for a messy, protracted, and chaotic engagement that would make the shipping lanes impassable for months. The strategic paralysis that would ensue is exactly what the hawks in Tehran might be counting on to leverage concessions, while the U.S. strategy relies on overwhelming technological superiority to end any engagement quickly. History, however, has taught us that wars rarely go according to the pre-war plans. Continuing to the human element in conclusion, The human impact of this geopolitical chess game is often lost in the discussion of barrels per day and missile ranges. But let us not forget the crew members on the USS Abraham Lincoln or the sailors on the accompanying destroyers. These are young Americans, thousands of miles from home, operating on high alert, sleeping in shifts, knowing that the alarm could sound at any second. For them, the market fluctuations are irrelevant. For them, the reality is the dark water and the unknown. And, on the other side, the Iranian conscripts manning the coastal batteries are equally caught in the machinery of statecraft. The tension is palpable not just in the price of crude oil, but in the pulse rates of thousands of individuals staring across the water at one another. Ultimately, what happens next will likely depend on the success of those quiet voices in Ankara. If they can find a face-saving mechanism, a way for the U.S. to reposition its fleet without looking like it is retreating, and for Iran to lower its defensive posture without looking weak, then the markets will calm and the destroyers will turn back. But if those talks hit a dead end, we are looking at a very different reality tomorrow morning. The world is holding its breath. The machinery of war is primed and ready. It takes only a whisper to set it in motion, but it will take a shout to stop it.